This was an interesting painting, quite a standard piece of research here, sold as deer in front of a country house. And the key to understanding this painting is actually to find out what that house is. That is a big house. And when I bought this, which was in Ireland, it had got written on the back of it some reference to an Irish country house. But the more everybody looked at it, and all my kind of Irish connections who I asked about it, was quite clear that it wasn't Irish, and that was an erroneous inscription. As quite often happens, this is an old painting. This will be late 17th century, early 18th century. So let's have a date of 1700, roughly speaking.
Buckingham Palace.
Well, it's not a bad shot. It's that big. I thought it could even be a barracks or something. I mean, that's a very, very big house when you start counting out the windows. So high and low, I had this for about 6 months, and I was crawling through all kinds of, communicating with every kind of architectural historian I could think of, sitting in London, scouring around the country looking for the thing. And I was looking through a book on 18th century gardens. And I suddenly came across a house with a wall in front of it, looking in the plan. And I thought, that could be like mine. And there even, in the plan, there were little depictions of deer. I thought it was obviously a deer park like this is. Where is this? It was Kensington Palace.
Oh, really? Oh, wow, of course.
I thought, I can't believe it. I'm actually sitting on top of this. I was living not 3 miles away from it, and there it was. And actually, it doesn't look like this now, but obviously if you look at the central house there, you can recognise that by that sort of raised entablature in the roof line there.
Very naive wall, though, isn't it?
It's not a brilliant painting, but I thought to myself, right, so I've got Kensington Palace. I wonder, I started to look through their collection at Kensington Palace, and it was clear to me that although they got a number of 18th century views and so on and so forth, they didn't really have any paintings of the early date that I'd got this. This is quite close to its inception. I think it was built in the 1680s, for example, I'm guessing now. But my picture is, within 20, 30 years of it being constructed. And I thought, I wonder if they want it, And after toing and froing, I didn't know who painted the picture. I know the hand, but I don't know his name, and I'll just show you this because you can see there's something rather similar about this picture here. And I'm forgetting for the moment where that house is, but this relationship of an animal stuck in the front with the house behind is remarkably similar to this one, and the handling's the same, and that's in a public collection, but they don't know who the artist is either. It just happens to be the same. He will come out eventually who it is, but it's quite clearly he went around doing this kind of thing. And so I got hold of the palace and said, do you want to buy this? And eventually they said yes, and I remember they then sent me the memo they'd sent round when they did finally buy it, and they said this is very exciting because it's absolutely the earliest view of Kensington Palace we've got, and it now hangs in the palace.
Oh, fantastic.
And you can go and see it, provided you pay your entrance.
No,
So there's an example of identifying. I mean, it would be nice to find out this was painted by a well-known painter as well. I never got that far.
And finding a buyer for it.
And finding the buyer. But the identification of the object suddenly steers you in the right direction. And it's very gratifying, actually, that they are that historically conscious that they think this would be a very good thing to have on their wall, and that people would like to come and see it. So it was a satisfactory thing all round, but a lot of hard work and an element of luck. If I bought the wrong book, etc., etc. And it took 6 months to do too, with the money all sitting there,
of course,
not being turned up. Exactly. What else have we got? Now, portraiture. It's sometimes interesting, sometimes difficult to sell. That's a Welsh artist called John Lewis, and you recognise him from a fairly standard portrayal of a girl, quite decent painting of the drapery, etc. But there's slightly fanciful, almost kind of theatrical backdrop architecturally. It looks a little bit sort of invented behind, and he does that, and that's how you recognise his hand. She is okay looking without being beautiful. She's got a little bit of an overly pronounced nose, if one's going to sort of pick holes in. And essentially selling portraits is very much like looking at women. If the woman is beautiful, she has a higher value than the woman who isn't. It's as simple as it's a terribly sort of superficial thing.
But the silk dress is beautifully
Silk dress is nice. It's a big painting. But what the real excitement about this, and I think you can demonstrate with the next slide, is it had a belter of a frame.
Wow.
And that suddenly becomes a tremendous piece of decoration. You can almost forget who the artist is, unless he's somebody particularly interesting. I never knew who the sitter was.
Was it
but
1790, 1800?
No, it's earlier than that. It's about 1730, 40.
Okay.
So early, first half 18th century. You've got a sort of semi-Palladian frame, or in the classical taste, but it's a big belter of a thing.
That's carved wood, or was that
It's carved wood, yeah, it's carved wood. It's 18th century. And so you've got a decent piece of 18th century furniture, effectively, around this picture. And that on your wall, in the right setting, is a hell of a thing.
Yeah,
whereas you might argue that this, on its own, is interesting, nice painting of the dress, but it won't really give you the clout. And you're concentrating more there, I think, on the actual physiognomy of the girl. You go, she's not that good looking, or she is, or she isn't, But when you take the whole thing together with the frame,
it starts singing.
That's something for your dining room, sir. That is, yeah.
What sort of money is it?
That would sell somewhere in the £10,000 to £20,000 level, I would think. Depends who you're dealing with, But if you can get it in the right place.
And it fits in for them.
And it fits in for them. It's probably a high-end decorator's picture rather than a collector's picture. If someone's really interested in English portraiture, they're probably going to be collecting better-known artists than this, and they'll want to pay $50,000, $100,000 for those kind of things. But for something that looks tremendous in your house, if you have 18th century furniture and an 18th century house, that's the business. And under £20,000, it's not a king's ransom.
No, exactly. At least you can sell it on again if you needed to.
Yeah, exactly.
Feathers done beautifully as well.
What else have we got here? No.
The Eastern Market.
Eastern Market. Now you should, even as an auctioneer, you should recognise this fellow. That's Byron you're looking at there. Okay. So Byron is a romantic figure, great poet, great womanizer. Everybody likes him. The famous pictures of Byron, the originals, are all in public collections.
Looks a bit like me. Well, maybe he doesn't.
You without a shave. But there's still a following for these kind of things. And a bit like the Burns painting that we were talking about earlier, if you like Byron, you're never going to be able to buy a great original picture because the original of this is in the National Portrait Gallery. There's a better one, which I think is in the English embassy in Greece, where he, of course, spent a lot of time fighting and getting involved with the Greek nation. But you might like a very decent copy.
Was this done because I was talking about to Tony Roberts earlier, who talked about fakes and forgeries for Dodger in one of our previous lectures. But he was saying about the 19th century, a lot of 19th century people copied 18th century paintings.
Yep, exactly.
And in a good way as well. And they have value now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 19th century produced a huge amount of highly professional painters. I mean, some of them are not tremendously imaginative in terms of producing original works, but they're competent men. And like so many of these things, certainly if you're a king, for example, you get one picture painted of you, but there's going to be demand for more, certainly in the days before photography. So Byron's image is actually a desirable thing. This one dates, I think, from about 1900. It was by a good professional Edwardian painter, late Victorian painter, who just put quite simply all over the back of his painting, copied from the original, which is by Thomas Phillips, which is in the National Portrait Gallery. And I thought at the right price, if you're a Byron person, you would like this. It had a passable frame, and that's exactly the person who bought it. I had it on a fair stand of mine. There it was, and the person who bought it just happens to like Byron, and the picture was 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, something of that kind of. It was a modest sum of money for a half-length painting, and easily accessible. And you might, if you were nitpicking, pick holes in the fact that his hand is a little bit clunky down the bottom, perhaps, but the essence of the man there, with the kind of
the face has got this strong character and
the fancy dress. I think he's in strictly Albanian costume there. It's all very very exotic altogether. And I think if you're a Byron fancier, that's a lovely thing to have at not a tremendous price.
But for you as a punt, but because it's Byron, you thought it had more of a chance of selling, so you got it.
Precisely. Yeah, you're taking a risk. You're going to find a Byron fancier.
It's always a gamble. I mean,
absolutely the same thing with that. There are 5 original versions of this. They're all about the height of you and me standing on each other's shoulders, and you're never going to buy them. But being Napoleon, there were a number of copies made by his studio and by other artists at the time, and the gamble is, are there Napoleon fanciers around today? Well, the answer is there are. Some of them are French, not all of them, and there is a demand for this kind of thing. And interestingly, when I got this,
it's a powerful image, of a powerful man. So that's impacted history. So
great costume, tight breeches, handling his horse really quite exciting. He, in fact, when he crossed the Alps, this is Napoleon crossing, he did it on a mule. But when it came to be painted by David, the original, he said, "Paint me on a fiery steed. I want the steed to look really fiery, and I want to look tremendously in control," and that's what you've got there. But it's a very exciting thing. It's a copy, but it's a period copy. And interestingly, this one was sold to the southern states of America, which are, if you like, the ex-French states of America, and that's where there's a bit of a following for Napoleon. So that's exciting too.
It's like Confederate look about it as well.
I suppose so. So copies can be interesting. Some copies, though, can be so bad.
And this cost, I mean, I'm just saying, somebody for the viewers, I mean, if
broadly speaking, it depends on the size. I mean, you can buy a copy of Napoleon looking at this size, a half-size one, a great big thing. They'd vary on size, but you'd expect, if they're early 19th century French, they'd start at £1, and they'd probably finish around the sort of 50,000 level. Okay. On the original front, you'd be paying 20 million quid for a David. They're not available. It's as simple as that.
The Louvre won't let them go.
Now, that looks for all the world like an incredibly dull picture. That's only okay as a painting, and it's not, it's competent just about, but there's no swagger to it, there's no bravura. His costume is radically uninteresting. So the only reason you would want a picture like this is either if it was a picture of your granddad, or if the guy is famous. And it turns out, despite his rather kind of uninteresting pose, this is the great Joseph Paxton, the gardener, the creator of the Great Exhibition Hall of the 1850s, and the creator of the Chatsworth Greenhouse. He's a tremendous man, Paxton, great engineer, great gardener, botanist, etc., etc. And I thought there will be, in the same way as you think there are Byron fanciers, there must be Paxton fanciers.
Did you know it was a Paxton beforehand?
I knew it was Paxton, and I knew, but I thought this is not a great painting, and it was battered when I bought it. It hadn't got a decent frame. That's when I bought, which is almost identical to the date. We're talking about 1820, 1830 there. And it fits together very nicely as a package, but you've got to find somebody interested in the man, because if that's Joe Bloggs, what's that, £1,000, £1,500 or something like that?
Well, that's why you're working for, you're buying it. It doesn't matter what you bought it for, because you're looking for somebody who wants that painting.
Precisely, and you're taking the gamble that he's famous enough that somebody will want him. You don't know this intrinsically. It's always a risk. You put your money down. And of course, by the time I'd bought him and restored him and everything else, he became quite an expensive fellow in the end. But I started with institutions, and I thought, well, Chatsworth. And then as I started to look through their collection, I realised they've got about 3 or 4 pictures of him already. They're not going to want another one. So in the end, what I did was to address Kew Gardens, who have quite a nice collection of art, and they said, we haven't got Paxton, we like him,
Perfect.
And so he hangs in the Kew Library collection to this day, which is nice.
So the trick is not to be afraid if you believe that there is a buyer to go and approach those people and offer.
Yeah, and the painting's got to be good enough. It doesn't have to be blindingly good, but it's got to be good enough to hold that up. Because if you're headed for a public collection, you can't have some amateur daub. It's got to be a little bit better. Let's move on. Now that you might think is unsaleable.
Well, it's a beautiful woman, but it's in a cemetery.
It's in a cemetery, and
dressed in black, mourning.
When I bought this, I think it was titled something rather optimistically, "The Wayside Rest" or something like that. They were trying to imply to get away from the churchyard thing, but quite clearly, not only is this in a graveyard, but she's dressed in black, and so she's obviously relating in some way to what's gone on there. And when I researched this, I knew it was by an artist called Thomas Brooks, who's a good, solid Victorian painter. The earlier his paintings are, the closer to the pre-Raphaelite. So it's a little bit like an early Millet or something like that. He drifts off a bit in later years. But actually, I found the picture exhibited at the Royal Academy, what's it called? The Sister's Grave, which makes it even less saleable.
Oh, no. Have you still got this painting?
No. Well, you might think, but I thought this is so beautifully done. And the price I was being asked was so modest, I thought somebody somewhere will recognise the quality of the painting.
And it is beautiful.
Right. And this is the example of a picture you cannot sell to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. You have to sell this to a Victorian picture collector, somebody who really understands the quality of the thing. Because I think not only is it very well done, but it also tells us rather a lot about ourselves. We don't do this anymore. Yeah. We don't dress head to foot in black and go and sit in...
40 days and people would dress?
Yes, and then you change, you can put one bit of grey on or something, and you can slowly lighten things, but it goes on for a long time. And even odd things, if you look at the foreground of this picture here, the way in which they seem to bind these raised sods of the grave with something that looks like thorns there. And to this day, I haven't managed to figure out whether that's to do with trying to keep the rabbits off or whether it's actually a reference to the crown of thorns, etc. And if you start to read the gravestone
Agnes,
yes, sacred to the memory of Agnes something who died something, so it's obviously her sister, so it's a very heart-rending kind of thing. And I think sociologically this is quite an interesting picture. If you get away from the fact then, oh, that reminds me of death, I don't want it on my dining room wall, which is a fair comment to make. I think there are people out there who are prepared to give it a go, who are prepared to see that that is a high quality Victorian picture and deserves collecting. And so in the end I did sell this to a collector who actually has paintings worth millions of pounds in his collection. It was a very high-end kind of collection, and it needed somebody like that to buy it. A modest sum of money, though. In the end, it was under £10,000. But I like that kind of thing.
I mean, you've dealt both from gallery premises and privately. I mean, what are the advantages and disadvantages of those sort of styles of operation? Do you find now? I mean, the galleries, they cost a lot of money now. Obviously, rents are higher and everything else. And with online, it's easier to expose yourself now to the world.
You can to a certain extent. I mean, there's a rough rule of thumb: no gallery.
Because to sell this, you'd have to. It's very difficult to find.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but no gallery, no expenses, no clients. Yeah, I mean that's and the other way around: gallery premises, plenty of expenses, but in theory, an ability to promote. So how do you do this? You promote through the internet. You promote it through a gallery if you have one. If you don't have a gallery, you can do a sort of halfway house to gallery, which is taking stands at fairs. I mean, that's like having a temporary gallery. Instead of, you could do a fair a month, for example. Although interesting, you would find if you do decent fairs that your bill for the year will be substantially more than renting a gallery. So you've got to weigh that up. What sort of stuff are you selling? Are you selling things that you want the public to see? Or are they so sort of academic and arcane that you don't really care whether the public see? They probably wouldn't buy it anyway. You've got to point it at someone more specific. So it's an interesting argument. I mean, I've done both. I enjoyed my gallery time, and it did expose me to people. It's jolly hard work. You need to be there all the time. You can't suddenly decide, let's take a few days off. Somebody's got to be running the shop. And if you have opened the gallery to the public come in and you have to deal with the public,
Yeah.
And there'll be people who come in who just want to look round, etc., etc. The idea that collectors will come in.
But
and
you're
know
more
what they're
accessible then
talking
for people to approach you to sell art as well.
That's right. I think people like somebody because they feel there's a certain they will be there tomorrowness about them, which is good. So I think it also depends slightly on the animal you are. Do you like dealing with members of the public or not? Do you like trying to tell somebody about the merits of a painting like this? Or would you prefer only to be dealing with collectors or dealers or academic institutions who already know? And those are two different styles of dealing. I've done both. I think I'm probably going to go back and have another go, a final go, perhaps, at being on the street again in gallery premises. You can't, I don't think, do the dealing from the internet, etc., if you haven't had some sort of exposure already, because you need to get known. You can't interact with other dealers terribly well if they've never seen you around.
It's going back to the niche. You've got a niche in one particular area, so you get known for that.
Precisely. So I think I've got one more image. Shall we finish with that one? Talk about difficult paintings there.
Oh my goodness.
I thought this was wonderful when I bought it.
Angel of the North.
Angel, it is a bit like the Angel of the North. It's a German painting, and I had it for ages, and I could not sell this painting. And finally, some dealer came up to me and he said, "Listen, Nicholas, I'll tell you why you can't sell that painting. It has got a dead body in it, and nobody wants to buy a picture of a dead body."
Did you not realise it was a dead body?
I said, "But it's a very beautiful dead body."
It's a very beautiful dead body.
And my reading of this picture is that this girl here represents the angel of death with her black wing out, and there is the body. But the little figure on the left there is the departing soul heading for the sunlit uplands. And I find it actually quite an optimistic painting. But I didn't sell it for something like 12 years. And finally I had to tip it into auction to get it sold. And it may be that the German sensibility is what's required to buy this picture, because I just could not sell it to an English person. It is a bit of a German take.
Did you sell it in an auction in Germany?
I sold it to a German buyer in an English auction, as it turned out. But I think it's a German take on pre-Raphaelism, and it's a little bit strong beer for us. And finally, I think we've got. Here's my internet story, and we'll finish image-wise with this one. This was a painting,
Beautiful.
nice sketch for a big finished painting by a good painter called J.J. Shannon, James Jebuser Shannon, Sir James to you. And This was a sketch for a large finished Edwardian portrait, which eventually looked like this. He decided to put her indoors, but it's a big 6-footer, this, of Lady So-and-so. When I bought the sketch, I thought, in a way, that's rather a free and wonderful thing. It almost has a sort of impressionism about the brushstroking, etc. And I thought, somebody will like this. I knew who the girl was, but she didn't seem to be tremendously interesting. And to my astonishment, onto my stand at one fair I was doing come a couple of ladies who seemed to know the family. And they say, we think we know this family, blah, blah, blah. Well, I said, well, if you'd like to put the family in touch with them, maybe they'd like to buy their great-grandmother or whatever it is. And anyway, through a series of telephone calls, I eventually got some fellow, a solicitor from England somewhere, from out in the provinces, whose great aunt it was, I think. And I said, would you like to buy this picture? And he said yes. And in he comes and has a look at the picture. And before he starts, he says to me, I have to tell you, Mr. Bagshaw, that I've been doing my research and I understand you paid £3,000 for this picture at auction. Therefore, the £8,500 you're asking me is quite out of court. So I had this long explanation to go with him, and I explained that I'd bought it at auction, but nice as they were auctioneers, there's a premium to pay, then there was the cleaning, the framing, etc. Then there was the buying out of a half-share partner as well.
He was crying at the end of this, yes?
He was crying, as you can imagine. But finally I said to him, look, seeing as it's, you're a family, I'll do what I can. What about £7,000, And he said, I'll give you 5. And I said, look, I really can't do it. I'd love you to have it, and et cetera, et cetera. And he kept sort of stalking this picture on my website over the course of the following year. And I kept begging, that I would sell it elsewhere. And each time I'd been to a fair and I hadn't sold it, I get a little email from, would you consider my offer? Finally, mercifully, I sold the picture to somebody else at a reasonable price, I think £7,500, where it hangs quite happily in his house. And the chap was actually quite disappointed when he finally found out it was sold. And this is an interesting instance of how both he and I were disadvantaged by the knowledge of what this picture had made. If he'd never known what I'd paid for it,
he'd be happy to pay
he'd have bought it.
He loved it.
He could afford it. It's his family. He's never going to get it again in his lifetime.
It's a good lesson. It's a good lesson to the viewer. If you love something and the price is something, you need to buy it, because if you don't have it, it's gone forever. It's gone forever.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what advice would you give to anyone planning to start out dealing today? Just in a synopsis on a few pointers on what you've already said, and just a little overview of.
I think many things have changed, but a couple of things are still correct. Your method of dealing will be different. The methods of communication are different. Your clientele will be different. But I firmly believe you need to be dealing, if you are a specialist in any way, in stuff you like. You absolutely have to have a strong feeling for this stuff, because time will come and go. There'll be good years and bad years, but sometimes you'll have these things on your wall for a very long time. And if you never liked them in the first place, boy, you're going to hate them when you can't sell them. So I think that's absolutely that you have to take joy in these very wonderful things that you actually surround yourself in. And at times that will be the only reward you'll get, will be some joy. You won't get financial reward. But the other one, I think also, which I didn't pay much attention to when I started, and I would do now, is get yourself properly financed. Figure out what level you need to buy in and get the money from whatever source you might. If you want to deal in Rembrandts, it's no good setting forth with 150 quid in your back pocket, because it won't happen, And I think you therefore need to do your sums. I'm a child of the 70s in that sense, and got going in that rather kind of latter-day hippie notion that if you were vaguely well educated and liked the stuff you were dealing in, somehow you'd make a business. I mean, that just doesn't work anymore. You really do need to look at the objects you're going to deal in. How many of these things do I need? What are they going to cost? This is the money I need. Have I got it? If I haven't got it, I've got to get it from somewhere. Because underfinanced, it's heartbreaking being underfinanced and going into sales, wanting to buy this, and this, and everything makes 3 times the money you've got. You'll never get started. So deal in something you like, and make sure you've got appropriate money for the level you want to deal in.
That's really good advice. Nicholas, thank you so much for coming in, and I hope you can come and tell us a few more, go into a little bit more detail on the art that you deal with. But overall, that was a lovely introduction for everybody on the dealer's view on the art world. So thank you very much, Nicholas, and a pleasure meeting you today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alison.